Anti-Semitism. Maybe it was a slow realization, or maybe it felt like an overwhelming force, a wave that could not be stopped. Maybe it brought anger, fear, confusion, sadness. Anti-Semitism. Maybe it was wrapped up in your feelings about Israel. Maybe you felt solidarity with other Jews. We were all in the same boat. Maybe you felt distanced from them. We might be in the same boat, but we're not paddling in the same direction. Maybe it was a swastika painted on a building, a sign held by a protester, angry comments on social media, increased security at Hadash and across Jewish institutions, a friendship that had become harder, or maybe it was more, much more. However it felt for you, for each of us, it is undeniable that anti-Semitism has increased. We can say that it has increased, but let us not say that it is on the rise. It can't rise on its own. It's not the water table whose levels rise and fall. It's not a wave or a tide that washes over us and can't be stopped. Frankly, it's not like water at all. Why do we say these things so much? It's disempowering. Because we're all looking to stand strong against anti-Semitism or stand up against anti-Semitism. Standing strong against a tidal wave. What use is that? Instead, let's be clear about what anti-Semitism is. It is anti-Jewish hatred, but it is more than that. Kenneth Stern, director of the Bard College Center for the Study of Hate and former director of the Division of Anti-Semitism and Extremism of the American Jewish Committee, offers the following definition. Anti-Semitism is, at heart, a conspiracy theory that sees Jews as conspiring to harm humanity. It is offered as an explanation for what goes on in the world. It appears on the right and on the left. It is also the philosophical backbone of much of white supremacy. Let's unpack this conspiracy theory a little bit. In her pamphlet, History Has Not Gone Anywhere, April Rosenblum writes that anti-Semitism is a strange sort of oppression because it operates differently. Many oppressions rely on keeping a targeted group of people, poor, uneducated, designated non-white, or otherwise at the bottom of a hierarchy. Anti-Jewish oppression does not depend on that. Although at many times it has kept Jews in poverty, or designated non-white, these have been optional features, add-ons, if you will. Because the point of anti-Jewish oppression, anti-Semitism, is to keep a Jewish face in the front, so that Jews, instead of ruling classes, become targets of people's rage. It works even more smoothly when Jews are allowed some success and can be perceived as the ones in charge by other oppressed peoples. In this way, one goal of anti-Semitism is to be used as a tool to separate the Jewish community from other marginalized and minoritized communities. In doing so, anti-Semitism wishes to both divide Jews from some of our most natural allies in a struggle for freedom and liberation, and also ensure that those natural allies not have access to our intellectual and long historical resources of resilience either. We're not allowed to play by the same playbook. This is a manifestation of the same white supremacy and Christian hegemony that is unfortunately driving so much of our political landscape. Anti-Semitism isn't just connected to xenophobia, racism, and Islamophobia. It isn't connected to them, it is them. They are the same thing. It is indeed the backbone of white supremacy. Now you might say to yourself, what about anti-Semitism on the left? It exists too. Anti-Semitism from the left sees Jews as colonizers in Israel, white people who have stolen land from brown people and oppressed them. Anti-Semitism on the left hurts. It is what has strained relationships with communities that have been allies for years in social justice fights. It is what has made it uncomfortable for Jews to be in protest spaces. And it is the face of anti-Semitism that, horrified, we watched explode across college campuses this year. That anti-Semitism also positions Jews as being part of a broader conspiracy. It too must be addressed, and it can only be addressed through the tough and deep conversations, calling in our allies to see how this is operating. So here's the deal. In order for anti-Semitism to work, Jews must be kept in the middle. Jewish people get painted as both the undesirable element to weed out, the infiltrator, the enabler of elements that want to at least interrupt and at worst break down the status quo of de facto white power and privilege, and as instruments of colonialism. The face of a global power elite whose goal is to dispossess indigenous peoples of their land by using their outsized influence to pull the strings secretly behind the scenes. How does this operate? Rabbi, give me an example. Let me tell you a story from this past year. Several months ago, a member of our community sent me a petition to sign on to. This particular petition seemed, at least at first blush, like a no-brainer. Confronting hate. Sounds good. Its goal, to raise awareness of an anti-Semitic article in a local trade publication. Awesome. Where do I sign? The problem? I couldn't sign. It will become clear in a moment as to why. Here are some excerpts from my response. Thank you for sending this petition. While I very much agree with the majority of the petition and its goals, including and especially calling out the newsletter article's gross misrepresentation of the events in and around Al-Shifra Hospital in Gaza, and its its inaccurate description and characterization of Hamas as a combatant organization, rather than an internationally recognized terrorist group committed to the ongoing physical attack and political delegitimization of Israel, I cannot, in good faith, sign on to it myself. The two clauses, number 6 and 8, cross me as being a bridge too far. What were these clauses? They were aimed at dismantling the cause of and punishing the people within the workplace system who were working to further the cause of diversity, equity, and inclusion in their workplace and its culture. Indeed, the trade newsletter in question was the Diversity and Racial Equity and Inclusion monthly newsletter of this particular workplace. The first of the two clauses called for the firing of all individuals involved in the production and dissemination of the newsletter. It extended the demand to anyone within the diversity, racial equity, and inclusion group, human resources, and the leadership who at any level has involvement or oversight of the publication, and said that no one who contributed to this gross violation should remain in a position of influence within the organization. The second clause called for dismantling of the DEI committee and asserted that should there be a need to establish such a committee in the future, it must be reconstituted with multiple stakeholders, including members of the Jewish community, etc. As I read the petition, I recognized the signs. We, Jews, were being baited and used. Whose goal is it to dismantle the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion? Not ours. Everything this work stands for is a Jewish value. We were being used as the middleman again, the face of a movement that wishes to destroy efforts for racial justice and the decentering of white voices and power, while not actually being of that group. In this time of political polarization and deeply, deeply divisive rhetoric, we must be strategic as a Jewish community in our building of bridges, both between ourselves and other minoritized and marginalized communities in the United States, rather than distancing ourselves from them. We should seek to have our voices included and represented in DEI work as a group that has also been historically marginalized, impacted, and targeted by white supremacy. It does not get those of us who are coded as white off the hook as being granted privilege because of the whiteness of our skin, but it does bring us into coalition because we understand how it is to be not coded as white. The strategy to combat anti-Semitism cannot be one that takes down or targets other ethnic and racialized minorities in its wake. The problem that created the circumstances out of which the newsletter article in question was written is white supremacy. The perversion of facts, chiefly the toxic tropes of Jews as global power elites and a Western Zionist conspiracy, fuel the turning of Jews and other minority groups against one another. This is a trope that is not born out of the marginalized communities themselves. Rather, it is one that is imported by the culture of white supremacy and ingrained and internalized so deeply that folks espousing it don't even recognize its origins. How were we baited, though? How did we get here? Kenneth Stern, again, reflects on the nature of hate. When people hate, whether they hate people of another race, another religion, sexual orientation, or politics, they crave simplicity and certainty. They are seduced by binary good-bad thinking, and they are drawn to symbols. This is a human characteristic rooted in how we divide the world into us and them. And people who want to combat hate, we're human too, he says, and not immune from the seductive illusion and comfort of simple answers to complicated questions. Stern's assertion of about the humanity of people who want to combat hate is equally true if we substitute the word Jews. Let's try it. And Jews, we're human too, and not immune from the seductive illusion and comfort of simple answers to complicated questions. We must combat this trend, not fall prey to it. This is a time for bridge building and re-education. In other words, how can we, as Jews, ever see the movement towards embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion as something threatening? Diversity, equity, and justice and inclusion have ever been indeed our goals, as well as the goals of minoritized populations in this country. Let's make that the big ask, not folks losing their jobs and their seat at the table. I've spent months processing and trying to unpack this moment earlier this year, what led to it and why I had such a strong reaction. That moment was when I decided that anti-Semitism was what I needed to speak about on Rosh Hashanah. So have you ever done that exercise where each person is given a photo? The photo is of a rough gray something. What is that? Fabric? One photo is of an eye. One is of a thin snake thing. What is that, like a rope? Everyone is told to figure out what they're holding. Turns out they're all holding the same thing. Different perspectives on the same elephant. We've done this before, huh? Well, we've got an elephant, it turns out, a huge elephant in our society, and it is indeed called white supremacy. And it is so hard to take a step back and look at it all at once, particularly when we are only being handed one card with one piece of it. As Jews, we are handed anti-Semitism. As queer folks, we are handed homophobia and transphobia. As African Americans, as Black folks, we are handed racism. I could go on. When each person looks at that elephant, they are seeing the part that is closest to them. Police violence against Black people, the shameful rhetoric about Haitian immigrants, the anti-Semitism. Or Hadash is an incredible place. And one of the things that makes us so special is how many of us are driven to social action and social justice. It is very rewarding and important to donate goods, to advocate, to stand up, to shout out. And it is particularly easy in those moments when the cause or the topic is not about us. But what about when it is all about us? I want to talk for a moment, a brief discursus on internalized anti-Semitism, what it is and how it is operative within this cycle. I return again to The Past Didn't Go Anywhere by April Rosenblum. Internalized oppression is something that affects all oppressed groups. The form it takes depends on each group's history. For instance, on an individual level, Jewish people, especially men, often perceive themselves as physically weak. We were legally banned from being allowed to carry weapons for substantial periods under Christian and Muslim rule. European society in the Middle Ages excluded us from mainstream professions, farming, etc., that strengthened the body. For centuries, we were literally unable to protect ourselves and our families from mass violence and rape. Jewish people, especially women, often feel disgust about ourselves and our bodies because as the main racial other in Europe, European society and popular culture created its images of what was ugly and disgusting based on our Jewish faces and its fantasies of what our bodies looked like. You can see the pictures in your heads, can't you? She continues, our political decisions are also affected. Historical attitudes towards Jews taught us to believe that our own struggle was not worthwhile. Non-Jewish European intellectuals, including thinkers who heavily influenced the left, taught that Jews were a people outside of history. Prominent theories held that because Jews had no land of their own, we were a deformed group without a role to play in history and revolution. Many developing revolutionary theories saw the groups that mattered in creating social change as industrial laborers and peasants. But European Jews, having been excluded from these trades, did not fit neatly into those categories. From both directions, therefore, again in the middle, Jews learned that we didn't matter. Our only meaningful role in changing the world would be to support other people's struggles, in making ourselves useful. All of this has compounded the biggest piece of internalized anti-Semitism. After centuries of experiencing other people not come to our defense when we were targeted by violence and persecution, Jews have internalized the idea that there's no hope of getting other people to stand with us. For Jews who struggle for social justice, that means that we often stay quiet about anti-Jewish oppression. We learn to fight in support of other groups without requesting the support and solidarity that we ourselves need. It means losing sight of building a strategy for our liberation by finding allies in grassroots organizations. Instead, we depend on those in power, hoping that if we are useful to them, they will protect us. And at times, that leads us to cooperate in the oppression of others. In other words, we are scared of directing attention of non-Jewish potential allies towards us. Why? Because we've been burned by false potential allies before, and we remember the times in our inherited trauma, the trauma that's been passed down through our very DNA, our collective memory, the times when directing attention towards standing up for Jews felt like a reinforcement of the anti-Semitic claims themselves. Either just another instance of white fragility, being reminded that discomfort does not equal danger, or they say, see the power and influence they are leveraging in order to make a big deal about this thing that's going on. They are actually running the show behind the scenes. Because look, they have so much, because they have that much influencing power, organizing power and influence. Combating anti-Semitism is all about us, but not because we're the topic, but because we are at a crossroads. Our community needs to make a decision now about how we as Jews address anti-Semitism. Do we do it as a community, understanding anti-Semitism as an isolated form of hatred directed only towards Jews, or as part of the elephant of white supremacy, one feature on a bigger whole that can only be understood if it is understood with all of the other features. Instead of thinking of anti-Semitism as a wave, let's think of it as a tool, a piece of machinery being used to stir up hatred on the right to gain political power. Watch how the tool is used, how Jews are held up as having more power and influence than others, and then blamed for the problems of the world because of that. How a synagogue in Pittsburgh is blamed for facilitating an invasion of immigrants across the border. How George Soros is blamed for social movements that threaten the power of the right wing. It is Donald Trump telling a room full of Jewish donors last month that Jews will be to blame if he loses the election. It is the impeachment of Alejandro Mayorkas, Secretary of Homeland Security, who is both Jewish and a former leader of HIAS, for a tightly constructed conspiracy theory to let large numbers of Central Americans in order for them to immediately register to vote for Democrats, replacing the power of white people. It is preposterous, and it is all a lie, but it is working, and it is gaining traction on a larger and larger political stages. It endangers the Jewish community, and it endangers other communities alongside. A wave can't be dismantled, but machinery certainly can. I want to conclude with one more story from this year. There we were, two moms in a coffee shop. "Oh, Alanna," a woman beckoned from a table in the back, taking out her earbuds. "Oh my goodness, I have something that I need to tell you." It was the mother of one of Bina's second grade classmates and friends at our local public elementary school. I walked over and sat down, and she started to tell me a story. A few days before, a friend of hers had returned from an overseas trip to the West Bank and Gaza and brought back home a bracelet with a Palestinian flag for her second grade daughter. "Our family," she explained to me, "has always been involved with left-wing activism, and we've been talking a lot at our house about the things that are going on in Israel and Gaza. And my daughter, she was so excited to wear her new bracelet in solidarity. But then she turned to me and said, 'But Mom, I don't think I should wear it at school. I don't want to hurt Bina's feelings.'" With her hand on her heart, the other mom looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Isn't that the most compassionate and sweet thing you've ever heard?" I was stunned into silence. Hurt Bina's feelings? My mind raced. On one hand, yes, sure. Maybe in some universe it's sweet, it's thoughtful. I mean, maybe. But on the other hand, what does this story mean? What assumptions is this other mom holding about me? About how Rebecca and I are raising our daughter? About who we're teaching her to love, to hate, to fear? Every fiber in my being wanted to call her out or yell at her, but somehow I didn't. "Wow," I said instead. "That sounds like our kids are thinking some pretty big and sophisticated thoughts, doesn't it?" It's so crazy that they're growing up in such messy and challenging times. Our conversation continued. I got curious. I asked her more about her activism. She told me about being raised by radical feminist lesbian parents in the 1980s, growing up as a child of the New Left. She told me about arrests, mostly before having kids, that she and her husband had experienced during protests and at anti-white nationalist actions, including her husband's arrest in Charlottesville after punching a neo-Nazi member of the Proud Boys during the Unite the Right rally in 2017. Yeah, give them an applause. She shared that since then, her family has been trolled, both online and in real life, including an incident last year when swastikas were painted on the door of her house. Again, I was stunned into silence, but for a completely different reason. Swastikas? On their house? But I thought those were the things that we were targeted with, not the white non-Jews. "Wow, that's insane," I responded. And then thinking about the hundreds who gathered for a vigil outside of Beth Hillel Beth El after their Stand with Israel sign was defaced with similar graffiti last year, I added, "I can't believe I didn't hear about it. Was it covered in the news?" She said, "The news? Why would they cover that?" In that moment, I realized more strongly than ever that she and I We're in the same struggle. Why are we talking about this? And why on Rosh Hashanah? Because how we act next, the next steps we take, are truly why this is about us. We are not just the victims. We are also the good faith actors in making sure that a very complicated topic is handled with care in the spaces we inhabit. It is on us to build solidarity with other marginalized communities, not tear them down in the name of standing up to anti-Semitism. To name the ways that anti-Semitism is being used as a tool to attack other populations, to attack democracy itself. To ask others to act for us and to act for them at the same time. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be your will, and may it be ours as well. Shana Tova.